Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're keeping well. Apologies for the delay in starting this broadcast, and I hope very much that I am broadcasting to you. It's always a leap of faith when you press the broadcast button. Uh, my name is Steve Edmonds, and it's a pleasure to be presenting this month's NGA webinar, during which I'll be reflecting on the working relationship between clerks to governing boards and governing boards. And it's a working relationship that's absolutely key to the improvement of governance in all types of school governing structure. I'm sure you'll agree with that. It's also a relationship that has a huge part to play in affording the clerking profession the status and the recognition that it truly deserves in our education system. And that itself will go a long way to attracting and retaining people to do the job and to do it well and support effective governance. So it's a really important topic, and I'm delighted to be talking to you about it today. It's also a topic that has some tricky terminology issues attached to it, and I'll talk more about that in a few moments. But for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to use the title Clerk to the Governing Board to refer to all those, or to describe all those who provide a paid professional support role to a governing board. Now, I appreciate that many in that constituency either no longer or never have used the job title Clerk to the Governing Board, and I understand the reasons for that. But for clarity of presentation, I'm going to settle on one title, and that title is Clerk to the Governing Board, and I hope you won't mind if I do that. And I also hope that whatever your context is and whatever your particular position is, that you will be able to take something from what I have to say today. I won't be running any polls on this occasion, but I would love you to interact with this webinar and with what I have to say by commenting and putting your questions in the chat function. I promise that we do review those questions, we do review those comments, and we use them to inform our advice, our guidance, and indeed to shape our thinking around the topic or the topics. I also try to respond to as many comments personally as I can, and there is always the offer there of a follow-up telephone conversation with those of you who would like to unpick what I've had to say in more detail, or perhaps value a little bit of extra advice. So that's my introduction, and I will continue now by just taking you through what I intend to cover in the time that I have available with you. So I'd like to really reflect on the landscape in which the clerking profession operates, and it's an evolving and constantly evolving landscape, as I'm sure we all recognise. But more importantly than that, the part that we all can play, whether we're governors, whether we're trustees, or whether we're in that clerking profession, to create the conditions for excellent clerking and for clerks to succeed and thrive and make the utmost contribution to effective governance. And I'll also be taking a look at what makes for an effective working relationship between the board and its clerk. And what I hope to do is link those themes together in a coherent way and bring out some key messages that you can use, whether you are an employer or line manager of clerks, or whether you are a clerking professional, to inform your conversations with each other about how you contribute to effective governance, effective clerking, and more importantly, what you do to raise the status and the profile of the role on your board, and by extension, the profession. So I hope to give you some food for thought this afternoon. I'm just jumped on too many slides there, so I'll just jump back one and say that for those of you who are engaged with NGA and follow our work, you'll know that we run a campaign called Clerking Matters. And that campaign has an objective really, and it is to raise the profile of the valuable, I would say invaluable contribution that clerks make to school governance, at the same time as improving that contribution. And when we started this campaign, we started it with 4 broad aims, and you can see those on the slide there, and they are linked to awareness raising, increasing supply, promoting the professional growth and supporting the professional development of clerks, and of course helping to ensure that they're paid, that clerks are paid at an appropriate rate for the job that they do. And those aims haven't really changed during the duration of the campaign, because they still remain fundamental to the campaign objective. It's fair to say, though, that the branding, the campaign branding, the Clerk in Matters logo, and indeed the title Clerk, perhaps hasn't stood up as well to the duration of the campaign, hasn't stood the test of time so well. And that's simply because clerking is now a profession that has many more different roles or versions of roles in it than perhaps it did before. Actually, I should say that clerking has always been a varied profession. Those of you involved in it will acknowledge that. The practitioners are drawn from different areas and always have been. We have clerks who perform another role in the school that they clerk. We have clerks who operate as independent service providers and as employees of traded clerking services that governing boards engage to fulfil their clerking functions. So there's the practitioners are drawn from a number of areas, and it's probably always been the case to some extent that those practitioners have performed a different version of broadly the same role of clerk, not quite the same way in every institution, and there are reasons for that as well. They may have something to do with the individual concerned, the way that they were engaged, their skill level, the CPD opportunities that have been afforded to them. It may have something to do with the board itself, its understanding of the role, its requirements of the role, and how it utilises their clerk. And in some cases, if this is not too controversial to say, it may have something to do with the school, the institution, whether it's a school or trust, wanting to retain a level of influence or control over its governance arrangements, and therefore fashioning a role for the clerk that meets that aspiration. So it's long been the case, and it's likely to remain the case for some time, that the clerking profession is a varied one with different practitioners performing slightly different roles. But what we've seen over the last few years is the continued growth and maturity of the academy sector, with trusts and their families of schools spawning different governance, different and varied governance structures, which have different and varied paid governance professional roles supporting them. So where clerk to the governing board was once the dominant job title, there are now a multitude of other titles to fit people who provide support to governing boards at different levels, and you can see some of those titles on the slide. And it's particularly the case in medium-sized to larger trusts that we've seen the emergence of governance professionals operating at a senior level, some of whom have company secretary roles, but most, if not all of whom, will have extensive responsibilities for coordinating governance arrangements across a number of schools in a trust. And that probably involves line managing and supporting those people in clerking roles who are performing that on the ground for the local tier, for example. So when I said that terminology was tricky, I absolutely meant it. This really is now a profession with many different roles, and perhaps the time has come for us to consider using the umbrella term governance professional to describe everyone who provides a paid professional support role to a governing board, regardless of what their specific job title is. And as many of you know, this is the direction of travel that the Department for Education has taken. They see that umbrella title, or the title of governance professional, as being more appropriate for the sector that's emerging. It's certainly something that NGA has considered and continues to consider, and it's really something that we believe the profession rather should continue to have their say on and be influential in. So I'd be really interested to hear or read your comments in the chat about what you think, whether you think now is the time actually to use a more appropriate collective noun or appropriate umbrella term to describe clerking as a profession with many roles, and whether governance professional is a better fit. And this week NGA launched its 2021 clerking survey. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And one of the questions in that survey is about terminology, to seek the views of those of you in the clerking profession about how you regard yourselves and what you would like to be titled as. And we will be looking at the responses to that question very carefully, and using that to shape our own thinking and our own approach to communicating with clerks, and indeed on behalf of clerks as well. But what I want to do really is draw attention to and talk about the characteristics which cut across all types of clerking role and all types of practitioner, wherever they're drawn from, because I believe that when it comes to raising the status and the profile of the profession, it's far more important, or just as important, to concentrate on the ties that bind the profession as much as focusing on the nuances and the variances. Because if you fulfill a clerking role, then in some way or you will have a real influence and a significant strategic responsibility for delivering good governance, by ensuring that decisions are made and recorded correctly, by ensuring that legal requirements and compliance requirements are met, and crucially, by modelling those NOLAN standards of public behaviour and ethical behaviour, which boards rely on and need to fulfil their duties effectively, and their ambition for pupils, which is the business we're all in. So the tie that, what binds us together, what binds the profession together, is the impact that it has on governance. So whatever type of school clerking role that you fulfill, in some way and in some form, you will be contributing to the efficiency, the effectiveness, the productivity, compliance, and the ethical environment in which the board operates. And that's something that's really important to keep hold of. And actually, it's something we need to celebrate the profession for. But we also need to recognise that the profession has a part to play alongside those of us who govern and those of us who represent governing boards, and the system to promote that contribution and also contribute towards growing and improving that contribution. And when I talk about the system, I guess I'm talking first and foremost about the Department for Education, because the role that the Department for Education has, which is really important, I think, is to create the climate through appropriate funding and promotion of CPD, and by through appropriate and helpful guidance that supports not only the professional growth of clerks, but also helps with the design and development of clerking roles. And you may or may not be aware that the Department for Education funding for the National Clerking Development Programmes recently ended, and NGA is one of the organisations at the forefront of making the case to the department for continued investment in those programmes, because we see that as a crucial component in raising the status of the profession and ensuring that there are new entrants into it, and guidance has its part to play as well. Guidance for those of us who govern and for clerks and clerking professionals. And at present, the Clerking Competency Framework remains the only national standard document for clerks that there is, and it does a very good job, I think, of bringing together the common elements of a profession that has different roles. But it's quite understandable that some 4 years, since it was published, that the sector is now reflecting and questioning whether the time has come for it to be updated to make it even more helpful in evaluating the skill and responsibility levels, and indeed the accountability levels that go with those varying roles, particularly in governance trusts, and thereby helping to us all to understand the career trajectory or hierarchy of clerking roles that will create this profession and make it more visible and appealing for new entrants. And that's really important, and it's also important to have that guiding information to help us evaluate what pay, what is a fair rate of an appropriate rate of pay for those in clerking roles fulfilling different and varied responsibilities. I think we need to be clear that any guidance is unlikely to provide a perfect pay equation for those employing or line managing clerks, and indeed for clerks themselves, nor will it change the fact that pay is not decided by the system or the Department for Education. It's decided by those who employ clerks or engage clerking services, so the governing board, the trust board, or the service provider. So from our perspective, it's really important that we understand how to evaluate pay in an appropriate way that keeps people incentivized in the profession. And there are a few things to note here. I mean, first of all, something that we hear often is the fact that clerks are not paid for all the time that they are required to spend fulfilling their duties. More often than not, the focus is on the time they spend fulfilling their duties at meetings, which is not the whole job. And in fact, the hours that a clerk spends, are often unsociable, and that needs to be taken into account as well. But the rate of pay should reflect what's required in the role, both in meetings and outside meetings. For example, the professional advice, and not just the organisation and administration, because the professional advice requires a fair amount of knowledge and the ability to interpret complex rules and procedures and policy in a way that helps to inform effective decision-making options, and then in turn enables good governance. So it's really important that we recognise the whole job for those of us who are evaluating clerks pay. And it's equally important for us to create the opportunities for those in clerking roles and those who employ clerks to review pay in a routine way in their context, but in a way that is informed. And that means using documents like the competency framework, the local advice that may be available to you, whether that's from your local authority or from a service provider, and making the most of benchmarking tools as well to make better informed decisions about pay. Last year, NGA produced a report called Putting a Price on Effective Clerking, and what that attempted to do was use NGA's own standard job description for a clerk to an individual single governing board and give a starting level of pay for someone undertaking those duties. And at the same time, as that report was published, about the same time, the National Association of School and College Clerks produced a similar report, which took a different approach, but had the same guiding principle to provide boards with a pay benchmark, which they could use in a smart way to inform those conversations with clerks about pay in relation to duties, levels of responsibility, accountability, and so on. So those documents and those resources are really useful to the sector, and they very much contribute to raising the status and the profile and what we want to achieve for the clerking profession. I'm sure we'll share those links to those documents with the slides for those of you who are tuning into this webinar. And actually creating those opportunities is making a very important statement, and is one of the biggest contributions we can make at our level to attracting and retaining people to the profession, and embedding the fact that it's a very serious and important role. But it's not the only contribution that we can make. For those of us who employ and line manage clerks, there's some very important considerations, things that we can do that we don't need the Department for Education's permission to do. We don't need the system to tell us to do. You don't need NGA to tell us to do. This is the contribution we make ourselves to raising the profile and status of the clerking profession. And it starts really with the regard we have for it, the status and respect that we give to the role. I mentioned a few moments ago that we often hear from clerks that their role is viewed purely in administrative terms, a minute taker who organises meetings with some record keeping and compliance thrown in. And that really does not do great service to the fact that those in clerking roles, the overwhelming majority, maintain a great deal of procedural and practice knowledge, which they use to impart impartial advice, and in doing so, as I said earlier, act as enablers of effective governance. So if we start with that as our guiding principle, if we start in that mindset, then I think we see it as a very serious and an important role, the constitutional conscience of the governing board, if you like, and we're more incentivized then to provide clear terms of reference, whether that's a job description or a service agreement, that has that clarity of expectation, who does what, when, and what's involved, and then creating the conditions for a job to be done well. And that means for those of us who employ and line manage clerks, ensuring that there is some form of induction and ongoing CPD for those in clerking roles. It doesn't mean that we deliver that ourselves. It means that we have a role in influencing and expecting and helping to find those opportunities, and then building a structure around it, that's around appraisal, reviewing working arrangements, which then brings clarity to pay and discussion about hours. And I did single out professional growth and networking and reaching out for support. And what I would say to any clerks who are tuning in, reading that and thinking, well, that's okay, Steve, but actually in my role, I feel pretty isolated as a clerk. I'm not sure that there is the support that I need to grow professionally in the role. There is the peer support or role models out there for me to lean on and reach out to. So it feels a bit like I'm stuck doing this and not knowing where to turn. Well, if that's how you do feel, I would very much encourage that you make contact with myself, because I'd love to hear from you and see what we can do about that, and see what about opportunities that may exist in your locality or more widely, because there's some fantastic professional role models out there who I'm very proud to be associated with, and networks that I'm aware of that we can certainly signpost you towards. So please do reflect on that if that's how you feel. And for those of us in clerking roles, it goes without saying, doesn't it? Or I hope it does, that we are the best advert for the profession, because it's our professional, how we carry ourselves professionally, our knowledge and our skills and our ability to influence, that really brings what we do to the fore. So if you are a clerk or in a clerking role and you're tuning into this webinar and thinking, actually, well, the system needs to do more for me, I would agree with you. I wouldn't disagree with you, but I actually think that you can do as much for the profession, in fact, a lot more for the profession and to promote the profession than the system can. And in terms of building your profile and the understanding awareness in your environment, on your governing board, that comes a lot from the confidence and the credibility you have, which in itself is drawn and derived from the knowledge that you hold and the continuing sharpening of your skills, which is why induction and CPD is so important. But it also comes from building a rapport and communicating well with the board that you serve and the people that you work with. And it's something I discovered in my own clerking roles after a while, was whilst I thought that I was being helpful by regularly reminding those who I was supporting, what they were required to do and what they hadn't done or they needed to do, they didn't always feel the same way about the advice that I was giving them, because perhaps it didn't truly sort of empathise with their circumstances as a volunteer workforce. So I think it's really important, if we're going to promote our role and increase that all understanding, that we work on how approachable we are as clerks. We find out about the circumstances of the people we work with and how we can best work together, because the more persuasive and the more influential we are, the more our voice is heard, the more recognition that it has, and then the more the status of the profession continues to grow. And so that relationship between the board and its clerk is built on the foundations of clarity, understanding who does what what's expected of whom, how it's going to be done, and when, and having a trust and confidence in each other to do that with a degree of empathy. And if I may just share another example, something we often hear again from clerks to governing boards, it's the challenges that they experience in preparing and issuing board papers, because they don't receive those papers from the people that they're preparing them, who are preparing them rather, in good time or in good order to do the job that they want to do on behalf of their governing boards. And I understand that, and those things are extremely frustrating. They don't reflect well on the board, and they're not helpful or respectful to the clerk. But I have always believed that these things can be put right with a good professional conversation to find out about the circumstances that these situations are occurring in, and how, with the people you work with, a routine can be fixed, amended, or a reporting process can be made less onerous, so that situations like that are more less likely, rather, to occur. So that just keeps building, really, I think, on the key message of this webinar, is that the clerk's contribution, if it's undervalued and overlooked by the governing board, or the clerk feels that way about it, and it very much is in our power as clerks and as governors and trustees to change that, to change that, and to influence a different mindset. And the other thing that I would say that really reinforces an understanding and a status for the role of those providing this valuable support is the appreciation and the recognition that they receive. And after the year that we've had in 2020 and so far in 2021, what better way is there to recognise the immense contribution that your clerk has made to business continuity and resilience of the governing board during this very difficult time, than to consider nominating them for an NGA Outstanding Governance Award. The details of these awards, which is part of our Year of Visible Governance, are on our website. And as you can see, we have two categories for clerking roles. One is for an outstanding clerk to a governing board who has contributed immensely to an individual governing board, board of trustees, or local governing board, or academy committee, to use NGA parlance. And there's an award for those managing clerks and those in clerking roles, and fulfilling a wider strategic role, perhaps across a number of schools. I mentioned earlier, we now have the emergence of a very strong sector of governance professionals operating at senior level. So we have two very distinct categories, but with real connections in terms of values and contribution. And these awards really mean something. They mean something to us, and they mean something to the sector, because it's your inspirational practice that is raising the status and the profile of the profession all the time. And what better way is there to make clerking visible and help the sector to understand the massive contribution that it makes than to celebrate it? So I really would encourage you to consider putting your clerk or outstanding lead governance professional forward for one of these roles. And I mentioned visibility and visible governance, and I hope you'll have seen that NGA has a visible governance campaign running throughout this year of 2021, and that is a celebration. It's to raise awareness of the contribution that all forms of school governance makes to our school system, and we're going to be doing doing our visible governance campaign activities in different ways throughout the year. But we couldn't have a year of visible governance without a month dedicated to the clerking profession. And I'm absolutely delighted to say that March will be that month. So we have lots of activity planned that's dedicated to the valuable work of clerks. I mentioned earlier that we've launched our latest clerking survey. That closes on the 1st of April, and the focus of that survey is on career development and professional growth. So what we really want to learn and build a base of evidence about is how clerks who enter the professions at different levels are afforded the opportunities to progress through opportunity, but also through CPD and the link between qualifications and progression, and indeed what opportunities there are to progress, and whether clerks themselves see those opportunities as relevant. And I think the more we learn and understand about how that works in this varied sector, the more opportunity there will be for us to create some kind of meaningful framework that incentivizes people to join the profession, move through it, and really provide a sustained and valuable contribution to school governance, which we all know, if we've been involved in it for some time, it is something very special. So the clerking survey, please, if you're a clerk or in a clerking role, do have a look at that and tell us what you think. It's very important to us. We'll also be delivering podcasts and blogs, and you look out for articles in our next edition of Governing Matters, all focused on this valuable role. And at the end of the month, we'll be running our annual Clerks conference virtually this year over 2 days, but nevertheless with the usual varied and rich programme that has something for every type of clerking role, with the usual range of expert contributors from the Chartered Governance Institute, from the Department for Education, from within NGA, and indeed from within the sector. And it's a brilliant opportunity. It's a shame it's not going to be face-to-face this year, but it's always a wonderful opportunity to hear and share and celebrate the valuable work that we do. So I know many of you have already booked your place on that conference. Details are on our website. I think there are still places available, and we'd love to see you there. So visible governance means visible clerking as well, and we're delighted that March is going to showcase that. And I mentioned sadly a few moments ago that DFE funding has now come to an end for the national development programs for clerks, but we at NGA are very much committed to continuing to run our level 3 accredited qualification for clerks. And the reason we're committed to it is because, well, but first and foremost, we're very proud of this program. It has made a real contribution and had a real impact over a short period of time. But also, the people who have taken part in it tell us that it has had a really transformative effect on the way that they do their job as a clerk in whatever context, and it's helped them to develop and to work more effectively with their governing boards, and that in turn has increased the effectiveness of their governing boards. So what we're able to do is continue this program at a very reasonable and competitive price for governing boards who want to invest in their clerks' professional development. So I'd encourage you as clerks and as governing boards to take a look at that program and how it might meet your needs. Details are on our website and on the email address, which we'll share with the slides. So that's our clerks development program. And that kind of brings me to the end of my message, really, my webinar, my real call to arms, really, to all of us involved in governance to continue to promote and do our bit to make clerking visible and raise the status and the profession of the role. I hope that you found it useful and thought-provoking, and it will trigger some conversations on the between yourselves. I think that all that's left for me to say, which I always do at the end of these webinars, is thank you for all that you do on behalf of our children and young people. But on this occasion, I'd like to single out for thanks those who operate in clerking roles for the immense contribution they make, but also for the calm and principled leadership that they've demonstrated during the course of the pandemic, which has gone such a long way to ensuring that we've been able to maintain business continuity. It's very much appreciated and not taken for granted by NGA. So that's the end of the webinar. It's been lovely to be with you again. I look forward to talking to you again soon. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.